Hello, my friends. It's been a little while since we did a reading vlog here on the channel because my last one got corrupted and the audio was messed up and I didn't get to do a Fukushio's Dart, but we're back and with two books this time. And that's going to be Klara in the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, and then also one that I've been super excited to talk about on the channel for a long time and to get to, and that is Mary Gentle's Ash, A Secret History. So these books are pretty different from one another. Klara in the Sun, way more simple of a premise, so I'll start with that one. Ishiguro has become one of my favorite authors. Without a doubt, top 10, if not top 5, maybe top 3 by the end of this book. Klara in the Sun is simply about somewhat of a futuristic world, and a girl goes and purchases a AI type friend, but it's like humanoid, right? Think about going and buying a doll back in the day, like way back in the day when that was still a thing, except that it can talk to you like a Furby, but like intelligent. And from there, I don't know what to expect from this story, except that it is a bit of speculative fiction, and it's coming from an author that is 2 for 2 with me thus far, with Pale View of Hills and Remains of the Day. Klara in the Sun was very well received, not as much as the other ones. I wonder if the speculative fiction aspects of this book are, some of the reasons why it's not as highly praised by everyone, because, literary snobs and all that. But I'm very, very excited to read another book by him. But the real cake, the real winner of this vlog, hopefully, will be Mary Gentle's book, Ash, A Lost History, or A Secret History. I can't remember. I'll put it up here on the screen for you. I should have brought the books up here, but I'm doing this under a time crunch, so oh well. This book is one that I've been wanting to read for a long time because I've seen people say, if you really like frame narratives and out of the normal type deals, this is one that you should check out. It is happening in the 1400s. It is a historical fiction, but also a fantasy. So we'll call it historical fantasy. It's clearly about a mercenary lead who is a female named Ash, who, in every account of history, did not exist in a place that did not exist. This is all happening around the Holy Roman Empire and Burgundy and some other legendary places like Carthage and other things. The big thing about this story is that it's supposedly you're reading a lost manuscript. There's a guy named Radcliffe who's went back through the histories and found all these accounts, and he's translating them into a more modern version. And just before publication, this book was erased. So what you are reading is like the last true, there's a cat in the background. This is the one true manuscript, and it has all of the emails that this guy named Radcliffe sent back and forth with his editor. So the introduction to the book is an introduction saying you're about to read a manuscript along with emails about this story of Ash. So we're like 3 layers removed. And then the next layer, which is the next intro, you see that Radcliffe is introducing the book to his editor or the prospective reader, or prospective reader, whatever. So as you can tell, it's a very strange frame narrative. And each section of the book begins with, from what I can tell, at least from the first part, a chain of emails of Radcliffe kind of sending over this translation to his editor or his agent or whatever at the publishing house. And the publishing agent being like, okay, this is good or this is bad. What is this? This is crazy. And I'm not too far into the book at all, but I can tell you that this is one of the most interesting premises of all time. And Mary Gentle is a pretty renowned author and was very well received by people for a very long time. I believe that she has a PhD or a master's or something in medievalism. So this being written in that medieval time period, you can definitely expect some accurate facts, but also seems like she's going to be having some fun with it too. I've heard the fantastical elements are kind of like legends and myths from that era actually being true or different than what we expected, and it's actually a blend of realism and myth, so that's really neat. I think one of the reasons why this series, and we'll see as I read it, maybe I can pick up on reasons why this has kind of fallen to the wayside in the public eye, but one of the big reasons is, from what I can tell, and maybe I'm wrong, but I have not found an audiobook for this anywhere. I also think that the weird frame narrative and the device it's using of being a lost manuscript, and then you're finding the lost manuscript with an introduction, and then reading through emails of a publisher between the parts is probably something that I mean, some people like that kind of challenge, and then some people are just going to turn their nose up to it. I happen to love that. I love when authors use a whole array of methods to tell their story, and I think that this makes it kind of unique. So, a Joan of Arc type character with Ash, a mercenary leader, and a mercenary gang. I think that this is going to be potential to be an amazing series. I believe there's 4 books. I always end up getting the number of books wrong, but you can buy them in one big bind up and they're like this. But I actually am just reading the first book, which is roughly 400 pages or so. So during this vlog, I'm going to be reading through that, and I'll be starting Klara and the Sun as well, which I'm buddy reading with my friend Joanna and Murphy, of course, and I'm very, very excited to talk about with them. But these are going to be 2 books that I have really high hopes for, and they're 2 that I've been wanting to cross off the TBR for a while, especially Ash. So we'll see how it goes, and hopefully we both have a good time with this. Me reading it, and then you watching me read it, whatever. Without any further ado, let's get this vlog started. Quick amendment though, before we do get started with the vlog, I wanted to also just make it very clear that the reason why you're reading the only manuscript is like right before this Radcliffe published, Ash's history, in the tale, they were all pulped and pulled and restricted because it would change too much of what we know about world history. So if you're someone who really likes alternative history, I don't think it's going to go as far as Ancient Aliens or anything, but if you're someone who likes alternate history and what if things were possibly different, I think that this could be a huge hit for you. I like that kind of stuff. I think it's fun thought experiment, and seeing it in a narrative form could be really cool. So I wanted to, you're reading this last manuscript, the only manuscript of it, because it has been destroyed in the way that it actually existed for publication, because it was way too controversial, again, in the fictional world. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Till I get up, time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go through the wastelands, through the highways.
I have gotten through about 150 pages of Ash, and I have gotten through a good chunk of Klara and the Sun. Klara and the Sun, I feel as if is almost guaranteed to be one of these books, like all Ishiguro books, that I love, and I have to give the disclaimer that most of you will probably find it the most boring, stale thing ever, because Klara and the Sun is simply about a girl who gets an AF. I assume it stands for artificial friend. But the thing about Klara and the Sun that is really driving me, I'm going to talk about Ash second because I have more to say about it. But the thing that Klara and the Sun is kind of driving me forward is the fact that it's actually told from the AF's perspective, Klara. I thought it'd be told from the girl's perspective. No. It's told from the doll's perspective. I'm going to call it a doll. I'll just probably refer to it as AF, so you know what I mean. So it's told from the AF's perspective, which I think does have the possibility of making it feel a little bit, not stale, maybe distant, because the AF is not aware of every single thing. Like, for instance, the AF doesn't have a sense of smell, and also is not aware of every single thing in the world that us humans would take for granted. The AF might have to try to puzzle it out of, like, what this is. For instance, Klara ends up in the house with the girl named Josie, and she is flabbergasted by the kitchen island, which is, honestly, I thought was kind of funny. But before we get into the girl's house, you spend a good amount of time with Klara inside of the shop that she's being sold at, and the dynamics of the shop and the positioning of the sun mattering, Klara and the Sun being the title of the book. The sun seems very important to these AFs. I think they may be solar powered, even though it's not told to you point blank. This book does not tell you a lot of details. You are really kind of figuring out as it goes. And because of that, that is what makes this book, I mean, outside of just being a really smooth reading experience, because I think that he has phenomenal prose. Outside of that, it's like the mystery of this like slightly futuristic world of like what's going on. Like it seems like people are sick. People don't seem to go out to restaurant and movies. These are just like little tidbits that you hear. So while Claire's in the shop, you're looking out of the window with Klara, and you're learning things about the present day world. And it's a great introduction to what the story is being set up as, because you go from the storefront into Josie's house, the girl who ends up getting Klara. And Josie seems to be sick. And I'm not going to say much more just because of spoilers, but Josie has her own little world. She has friends, and she gives us even more hints that the world seems to be very strange nowadays. There's kids called the lifted and the unlifted. I don't know what that means. Pollution seems to be a big deal. And you're trying to puzzle out exactly what's happening in the setting the whole time. So even though you're just learning about Klara and her little Klara and the little girl Josie being friends, you're also just dying to know more about the world. So it's like this really subtle mystery. There's not a bunch of red herrings or, who done it, nothing like that mystery wise, but just clever world building that doesn't need all explained, and it gets your wheels turning. I would say this reminds me a good amount of Jeff Vandermeer's world building, especially in Born, where some stuff is explained to you. But I spent a lot of time in Born and Annihilation just wondering what is going on in this world, and you can just sit there and ruminate on it for a while. I've loved reading this with Murphy and Joanna, bouncing our theories off of one another. And there is a mystery of exactly what's going on with Josie and her family that I do think will be solved by the end of the book. But I think telling this from the AF's perspective, there's a little bit of distance, and some people might struggle with that, or maybe it will feel a little bit mundane. But if you're interested or curious at all about the world and what's going on with Josie, I think that would propel you forward, as it is me. I am loving this book. I mean, just as much probably as Remains of the Day at this point, even though it's very, very different. The signature straightforward and smooth writing style, but definitely different. And I think this is certainly in that sci-fi speculative fiction, like near future type deal. But I am loving it, and I got to figure out what is going on. I have theories, and I don't know if any of them are right, but I need to find out. So I'm really, really liking this quite a bit, but I am concerned that people might find it a little bit boring. But that's for you to figure out, not me. I'm trying to pitch it as truthful as I can, and there is a large section, I think it was like 20 or 40 pages, of Josie and her friend writing out comics and filling out speech bubbles. And that does sound pretty boring now that I mention it, but there's a lot to extrapolate from there. So this is a book that you would sit with little bits at a time and think on, and you could really dig into like the psychological aspects of this book, which I love. So big hit with me so far, definitely a home run at this point, but we'll see how it continues on. But now we need to talk about Ash. So it is Ash, A Secret History. I said Lost History in the last update, and that wasn't entirely correct, but I'm read about 150 pages, which is through 2 parts. And the first part is being introduced to Ash. Obviously, we get the introduction with the emails and the manuscript to set up the frame narrative and whatever. But now once you're reading the manuscript, which does have footnotes, by the way, like annotations that the author was including for the agent, which is another layer of just like craziness that I kind of loved. The footnote, I'm not a big footnotes guy. I think that's fine here. It actually adds some historical context, which is kind of cool. Someone that knows more about history would have to tell you if they're actually accurate or not. I'm not sure, but I'm enjoying them. But we get to introduce to Ash as a 10-year-old girl. And this first part is that, and then you jump ahead in part 2 to her being a little bit older. And I'm going to be honest with you, I really struggle with this first part, not because it's boring, but because of the content. Ash is a scarred little girl, 10 years old, in a medieval mercenary camp. So what do you think happens? If you're thinking abuse, then you would be correct. And it is, extremely tough to read. I mean, very brutal. Actually reminds me quite a bit of Berserk. And I never thought I would be saying that about some historical fantasy that was written a couple, decades ago. But here we are. It actually reminds me a lot of Berserk. Guts grows up in that mercenary camp without knowing, who his mother and father really were. And he goes through some traumatic experiences in that camp and sees a lot of bad things, and it kind of shapes who he is. Ash's start is very similar. So at first I'm on train. I'm happy with it. And it was very uneasy to read the abuse happening to a 10-year-old girl. I mean, it's horrible. But in the setting, in this time period, and the people she's around, maybe that would happen. I don't have an issue with it. It's hard to read. I don't like reading it, but I don't have an issue with it. I did have an issue though and these are light spoilers for the beginning. I mean, this is like right in the first like 20, 30 pages, so I think you're fine. But after her abuse, she gets her revenge pretty quickly. And it's like, okay, well, she's definitely scarred internally and externally now, which is really tough to deal with. But then we go into this time period of her, I think she's like 10 or 12 again, and she is making herself look like really young and innocent and pretty. And she is using that to manipulate grown men into like sexual favors in exchange for stuff that she wants to kind of survive. And you get the sense that it's maybe Mary Gentle trying to give some agency back to Ash. But I really don't like the idea of this 10, 12-year-old girl in a mercenary camp who has had this traumatic experience, then turning around and being able to use her body, use her body for favors and it not bother her. Now, maybe I'm supposed to imply that it bothered her, but like, it's very obvious that she is taking it in stride. She's even like talking to the guys while it's happening. And it's kind of graphic, and I didn't like it. In fact, I thought about DNFing it. I'm not even going to lie to you. It was just very uncomfortable to read, obviously, the initial thing. But then to see that, I don't know. It bothered me quite a bit. I decided to read on because I've been wanting to read this for a long time. And I'm happy to say, oh, by the way, before I jump into the part I liked, and then like right after that, you find out that she's been embarrassed by this guy and his group of friends, and they're all like, I don't know. They're like using her like a urinal. I mean, but then you get through her like childhood introduction and there's some fantastical elements, maybe a little bit of prophecy or something. And she gets a voice in her head. And now I'm into the fantasy elements. And then we move away from that in part 2. So you get like a bunch of emails between the editor and Radcliffe, the author, which Mary Gentle is writing. I got to keep reminding everyone because I know it's weird to talk about it like this. But then we jump in and she's 20. And now she's a mercenary head and she's in a battle and the Holy Roman Emperor is there. And I got to tell you, it started to get really cool. The beginning was rough. Like I said, I legitimately almost DNF'd it. And I still take issue with the whole like, well, I'll just use myself for favors type thing. From a POV of a 10-year-old just seems, one, unrealistic, but also just like not something I want to read, to be honest. But I'd be a liar to say that if part 2 hasn't captivated me. And I found this book to be extraordinarily readable. And one of the reasons why is because Mary Gentle has given herself a little bit of an out to write this in a way more modern way, because Radcliffe, the in-world author of this manuscript, is trying to capture a wide audience at the time that he's publishing, and he is taking these translations and then switching words around with more modern terms. So the F word is thrown around a lot. A lot of other modern words are used. I think that there are probably some people who are really into history that this will turn off, very much so. For me, I wasn't sure how I felt about it, and I kind of felt like a little bit cheap maybe, but it does make it more fun to read, and it's a little bit smoother. And Mary Gentle has some great dialogue, and she's already set up some of the relationships within the mercenaries that I really, really liked. So in 2, you're getting some action. You're learning about relationships she's built now that she's 20 and the respect that she's been given, and also how the mercenaries are pawns in the greater scheme of what's happening in the region. And she happens to fall into a pretty rough scenario, though nothing like part 1, thank God. We'll see how that ends up turning out, though. So the modern language, while it could be grating for some expecting a more medieval type story, I think does work. And it's kind of, I don't want to say fast paced, but very addicting to read after you get into part 2. And if you can struggle through that first part of the content that you're going to get through. But without a doubt, very graphic book. Way more graphic than I thought it would be. Kind of shocking in some ways. I mean, this might be in the top 5 books I've seen use the F word, and I'm only 150 pages in. So if you're not into that, and it's certainly any of the graphic content that I already talked about, you want to steer clear from this. But this is a pretty dark read. But it also does have some personality, and there is some humor as well that I really liked. And it's definitely more of that, like, soldier humor, gallows humor that you'll get. A lot of smart asses in this book already. So she's been set up into a precarious position as the leader of a mercenary, but also as someone who doesn't consider herself really a woman in the world. I mean, she just acts like a man. but not in like a cheesy way or anything. Like she's just being a mercenary, and it's a very masculine role. And she finds herself in a position where everyone else is looking at her like a lady, and she has to be like, oh, ladies are supposed to do this. And now she's in a weird spot, and I won't give anything away because of spoilers, but I am so curious to see how this ends up playing out. We definitely have an antagonist set up that I hate with all my heart already. And I think that the legends of Ash, and that's what this whole series is about, is just beginning. But even some of the fantastical stuff that has been introduced here has been dope. There's golems, like real golems, not like what we think golems might have been. Like these golems are real. And I love that. There is a sense that there's advanced technology that was lost in history, and that maybe some of the stuff coming out of Northern Africa was way more advanced than we ever thought. And I think we're going to get like, I said Ancient Aliens earlier, and I still don't think it's going to go to that level, though it could. But it certainly feels like lost technology, which I love that trope and that version of alternate history. So that all has me locked in. So, very graphic story, very shocking. Part 1, horrible to get through, to be honest. I think a lot of people will DNF once they get to the scene that I got to that disgusted me. But if you can get through that, and I'm not forgiving some of the stuff I had problems with, but if you can get through that, this is just a wacky, grim read that is very gripping. So, Mary Gentle, you have my attention. You do. And we'll see what happens up in the next update. Okay, I really hesitated to do this update in the car because I don't have a tripod, don't have my good mic. I don't know how much background noise you hear, but I just finished up at the gym. And I just need to get this update out because I'm going to be reading more today. Very brief. Klara and the Sun. Wow. Going a little bit further than I thought it would. I think it's playing with a lot of the issues with like AI and personalities and stuff. And the thing that I'm taking away from it is like how fascinating Klara is because she's an AF and not a human. And I continuously forget that she is not human until something weird happens. And Ishiguro is doing such a good job of doing that subtly because of the distinction I think in-world people also struggle with. Like at one point you have Klara's mom. I'm sorry I'm moving the camera around so much. My arms are shaking from working out. I'm trying not to make this unbearable for you to watch. Anyways, so like for instance, Josie's mother is having these really serious conversations with the AF, with Klara. And you're like, wow, this is like a part of the family almost. And then whenever they're going to take a trip into the city, she's like, yeah, you won't have to ride in the trunk, I don't think. You're fine, Klara. And it just is so jarring because I think of Klara as almost a human character, but she's not. She's programmed. Like, she's artificial, no matter how lifelike it feels. So these moments kind of jar you, and I think they actually also jar people who are in the story as well, like Klara's mom. I think it's like really hard for them to balance, which makes this thing about like how do you like what are they if they get so human-like? But then Klara will stand next to the refrigerator and be like, I was getting very cozy next to the refrigerator because of the mechanical sounds that are happening in it. And you're like, that's weird. That's right, because she's an AF. So it's fascinating. I think that Ishiguro is playing with the idea of like an AI not always having the most logical path to a solution, which is like a cliche in AI. How do you stop spam emails from coming? Well, if you kill all humans, there's no more emails, therefore no spam emails. And it's like, well, that's not the greatest example of how to get rid of spam emails, but it would work. It's not to that drastic of an effect, but there is definitely some of Klara's actions that feel like a little bit out there. But it's because she is programmed. and how much of her obsession with the sun, I wonder, comes from her possibly being solar powered, but also from the idea that she would be programmed to see the sun in a way that is almost like mythological or like a god. It doesn't feel exactly human, but that's because she's an AI. So it's very interesting. I'm loving Klara and the Sun. I have no idea where it's about to go, but it is way more out there than I originally thought. So now let's talk about Ash. Ash, I've read about 50 to 100 more pages of, and I just have to say, again, very light spoilers, expectation spoilers here. She is in a romance. I feel like we might be trying to do enemies to lovers, possibly, which is one of my least favorite tropes, but like I'm willing to see it out. You know, I've seen it done well before and I've enjoyed it, so it's not an 100% hatred type deal. But man, you know, I talked about the update in round 1, how I had a lot of issues with some of the abuse stuff when she was a child and how it was done, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. There's a conversation to be had around it. Okay, so Ash, now grown woman, kind of forced in this marriage by an emperor, whatever. She has a past with this person that is borderline disgusting, I would say abusive, and she's been treated horribly, even though she was initially attracted to them early in her life. And now that she is married to them, they have all this tension. Obviously, they have a bad history together, and she is still somewhat attracted. Now, that's fine. Like, I think that you can be attracted to someone that isn't good for you or is, you know, like that. It's messy. It's complicated. It's how life is. That's how humans are. However, literally in the scene, there's a scene, you know, a romance scene where she is, I mean, being physically abused, like punched in the face, and then she's still, like, in that moment, still attracted to him. And it feels very gross to me. Again, I'm not saying that everyone's only attracted to people who treat them well, blah, 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 blah. But my gut reaction was, you know, if someone smashes you in the face and bloodies your nose, I don't think that you're going to be turned on by that. I mean, maybe you are. No kink shaming here. But it's not presented in a manner that where she, like, you know, in Kushiel's Dart, for instance, like Phaedra, pain is pleasure for her, and that's her curse, kind of, or gift, however they want to put it. But it's not the case here at all. So I'm a little bit troubled by just how Ash feels about this and like how the character is being portrayed. Though now sitting on a little bit more, like at first, honestly, I was flabbergasted. It made me again feel like DNFing a little bit. I just don't really want to read about a woman being battered and then being turned on by it. It's just like very odd. I think it might go somewhere. But here is the conversational piece, okay? And I'm gonna end this pretty soon. I don't want this to be too long, especially if the audio is trash. But there is a conversation to be had about, remember, Ash has a very complex relationship with her gender role in this medieval world. And she never has seen herself a woman and never been expected to be a woman except recently because of her stature being raised and being paired up with this guy. So, like, I could kind of see it being almost like an alpha struggle between her and her husband, and her almost like wanting to rise to the conflict, or I don't want to say the occasion, but like the fact that it's a conflict and almost a battle to her does coincide with the fact that she's been a mercenary captain and a leader of men and has never really looked at herself in like a feminine light or anything. And maybe, you know, it's like whenever there's a big CEO of a company and then it turns out that he likes to get like his face stepped on or some weird stuff you hear. It's like maybe there's something like that. So like I do think that there's a bit of nuance and maybe a conversation to be had about the way that she sees herself in a romance role and how that relates to what only thing she really knows, which is like been violence and surviving and whatever else. She's a very tough character, and I don't know exactly how I feel about the execution. It is probably the spiciest sex scenes I've ever read, but the fact that they're surrounded by so much violence towards the woman, it feels very uncomfortable, and I'm not a huge fan of it. So, which is a shame because everything else to this point, you know, after the first part, wherever I had troubles there too, there's a lot of good here. It's a very complex work, but my God, like, don't punch her in the face and then have her get freaky. I don't know, man. It's weird. I don't really know how to express it without spoiling everything either, so that's a little bit tough. But I felt like I needed to talk about it. So there you go. That's the update. I'll continue on. It's time to wrap up this reading vlog because I have finished Klara in the Sun and Ash Secret History. I finished Klara in the Sun like a week and a half ago, I feel. Maybe a week ago. That was very easy to get through. Ash was the one that took a while, or this would have been probably released at the end of this week, or I'm sorry, the beginning of this week or end of last week. But hey, we powered through, we got it done. And I have just a couple things to say. So Klara in the Sun, I just want to say, what a delight reading Ishiguro has been for me, and Klara in the Sun is no exception. I thought that this ending was melancholy, bit bittersweet, and definitely conflicting, but not in a manner where I'm like, is it good or is it bad? I just conflicting feelings-wise and resolution-wise. The more that we got of the world and the characters as the story rolled on in the back half of this book, there was a huge contrast between the almost like, I would say, messy / chaoticness of the world and the characters compared to in the beginning being fairly peaceful and sublime and slightly mysterious. Completely different vibes from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, which I really like that variance quite a bit. And the thing that this book does, and what he's able to do in almost every book I've read of his, is that he gets so much from so little. And it's not just, writing sparing details and that type of thing, but he knows when to leave something up to your imagination, and he trusts you to kind of puzzle it out and to get more from the work, at least in my opinion. I could discuss so many different aspects of this book, and I did with Murphy and Joanna, who I was buddy reading with, without really any concrete details of the world and its state, other than, a little bit of hearsay and things that are sprinkled out. But I mean, I could talk about the possible sociological impacts, the economical impacts, the philosophical impacts, and it's just beautifully woven together in a tight 300-page package. And there's not many people that could do that. It leaves a lot to wonder about. And I think it was a beautifully melancholy ending. And I've even seen some theories about this ending that I thought were just wild, that someone else had that different experience than me. Didn't necessarily agree with the theory, but holy cow. I've seen a lot of polarization of this ending. Some people absolutely hate the ending of this book. Some people love it. Some people find it encouraging. Some people find it heartbreaking. It's very different depending on who you ask. And that's kind of how Klara in the Sun has been sold to me as one of his books. It's not his best. Some people like it the most, but different person that you ask will have a different opinion about this book. It's just how it is. And for me, this is a 5-star read. I'm not guaranteeing that you will like it. I'm not saying run out and grab it. You gotta, read the blurb, maybe read the sample, and then go from there. But I would still say, I think that this is, I would say it's on par with Pale View of Hills, whereas Remains of the Day to me is like a 6 out of 5. Like, that's my favorite book from him, one of my favorite books of all time. I think Klara in the Sun and Pale View of Hill share a lot of things that he does, especially with leaving things super nebulous, make you questioning the POV, like, tremendously. So they're a little bit more similar in some ways, but I was just very much in my feelings at the end of this book, and I think I missed a lot of the subtlety that I was talking about. It almost became overwhelming, not in a bad way, but in a way that made me want to reread the book. And I just think that there's so much to dig into, but I was more so in the emotional aspects of the book rather than trying to analyze it by the end. And that's okay, because I will reread this, as I will probably reread everything he's written, and it was just an outstanding book. Okay, last time I gave an update on Ash, obviously I was not too thrilled, and to be honest with you, it was the closest I've ever been to having a first ever DNF on a reading vlog. I didn't touch it for quite a few days, and I almost DNF'd this twice, like right at the beginning, that first section, and then obviously with the last update, I was on the fence. But this story is interesting, and over a few days, giving it some time, reading some other stuff, I said, I want to get back to it. I was curious about it, and I'm so glad that I did finish it, because basically everything from that thing I mentioned in the last update that bothered me so much, everything was pretty much pure diesel, like pure gasoline, very good. And that's the thing, if all that was left out, I mean, or maybe even done with a little bit more care, I would say that the descriptions come across as beautiful writing, and the action is thrilling and moment to moment, really breath to breath with the characters. And there's enough twists and turns and action in here to keep you entertained throughout, even though, it's coming from almost an academic perspective with the emails going back and forth, which, by the way, those interludes, those emails back and forth, I thought it was just Mary Gentle trying to add some, like, context to like what's different about this history compared to, what we know as history, I was wrong. It feels like those emails are getting pulled into the story is all I can say. There's a lot more going on than at first met the eye. And some of the fantastical elements are haunting and impactful. I feel like we're going into sci-fi almost. This is kind of one of the most ambitious reads I've ever had. I think that this is doing something vastly different than almost 99% of things I've read in fantasy, and I love it for that. There was plenty to carry me through to the end of this book, and I'm curious. Like, I want to know what else happens in this book. I don't think Ash is like my favorite character of all time, and this is just such a conflicting book for me. I'm so mixed on it because I can sit here and talk about the action, the beautiful writing, and the frame narrative, and what Mary Gentle is going for is just outstanding. And also definitely checks some boxes that not many authors do. And if they do attempt it, usually they don't do it very well. Just very impressive. And Mary Gentle is obviously a talented writer, but it is so hard for me to tell you to run out and go pick this up. I had a friend, Taylor, who read the first section, the first thing that I had an issue with when Ash is a kid and going through some pretty harsh things, and she DNF'd it. And she said, this is just too much. Like, what in the world am I reading? So for me, I mean, it is almost, it's damn similar to Berserk in more ways than one. Not only just in being hard to recommend, but also in the content and some of the, like, storyline. It feels Berserky. If you're a fan of Berserk, you could probably read this and feel okay about it. But it's going to go in that pile of just really hard to recommend. And I've always wondered, what is it about a work that leaves it in the past or doesn't bring it to the forefront? And I think one, lack of an audiobook here, massive L from the publisher. And then, two, I would say the way that some of these scenes are written, it's tough. Now, I've read things that are pretty bad. The fantasy genre has been fairly famous for not handling abuse very well. But this is a standout for me in a way that is not good and not good. But it's also a standout because of all the cool things it does and the things that Mary Gentle are going for. So, like, I'm very conflicted. I don't know how to prioritize this series going forward. I went and bought book 2. I did buy it because I need to know what's going on. It is insane where we're going, I think. But where's it go on my priority list? Psalms of Isaacs by Ken Scholes, I think it gets above that. This is above Mary Gentle, or that is above Mary Gentle for me in just interest, because, like, there's nothing in that series that off-put me at all. It might be a little bit too average, possibly. So it's just weird. It's a very ambitious series, and I actually think for its ambition, it succeeds. But this other stuff is weighing it down and making it a very tough recommend. I mean, I would feel weird recommending this to you and you go reading this first section. If I just unanimously praise this without mentioning any of this stuff, you'd be like, what is wrong with Jimmy? And there's plenty wrong with me, but I just want to really get across the point that this is disturbing in many ways. So the best thing I compare it to is Berserk, which is insane. I never thought I'd be saying that about Ash Secret History, but here we are. So Claire in the Sun, an absolute slammer, probably going to be book of the month, though Use of Weapons by Ian M. Banks is going very well. We'll see. And then Ash Secret History, a very complex book, both in the way that it reads, but also in the way it made me feel. So just a roller coaster of a month. And hopefully I have more time to mull over Ash. And when I do my wrap up at the end of the month, hopefully I can do, a little bit more justice, maybe point out some other things that I liked about it. But I mean, I can't stress to you enough, outside of the disturbing, uncomfortable scenes that I didn't like, excellent. If those were handled differently or not included, I mean, we're looking at a 4.5 star book probably. So take that for what it's worth. I'm so happy that you came along with me in this reading vlog. I apologize for the lack of diversity in the shots. It's just been kind of crazy here. But I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for checking out. Do all the YouTube stuff. It always helps out. And until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page. I want to give a big shout out to all my patrons, especially my Kingsguard, which include Bridger, Zan, Adam K, Emil, Jonathan J, Prithvi, Eric B, Chadia, Taylor D, Matthias D, Carlos, Yolanda, John C, John, Garrick, Henrik, Benjamin C, Sebastian M, Frank C, C. Scott, Jacob Wade, Darren, Jobot, Terrence F, Michael B, Lauren M, Nicholas E, Kai C, Kev, Ryan, Shad, Amanda V, Ikaika, RJ, Stuart C, Oscar A, Derry, Tanner, Stromboli Bones, Damon H, Kuiper, Adam, Caitlin S, Curran G, Slay, Mark J, Mike J, Darnell H, Sabo A, Social Teist, Andre, and Jay. Thank you all so much. You're the best.